what happens in our brain when we are shown masked stimuli? What are the behavioral outcomes of neural processing of masked stimuli? So the parts of our brain, in some, respond to the masked stimuli. Using neuroimaging techniques such as fMRI and EEG, we can actually track the footprints of the brain processing to masked stimuli. And that's what I'm going to show today. And then, however, the response magnitude is much smaller than that induced by the visible stimuli. All right. So again, Standard-Haynes paradigm of the phenomenology and the behaviors. And under the visible conditions, because of the presence of this mask, blank mask, just before the target and after, phenomenally, it is totally visible and excellent in terms of performance, in terms of word recognition or memory, and so on. So, when you see it, basically you can do whatever with it. On the other hand, under the masked condition, phenomenally, this thing just becomes invisible. And then I showed the demonstration in terms of the backward masking, but you can imagine something similar in this forward and backward masking. And then accordingly, performance-wise, we can't name the stimuli, and also we can't remember, and our performance of the stimulus, whether it was presented as a note or different kind of word like book, it becomes completely chance, random. Now the response to the visible words. Okay, so the key of this Standard-Haynes paradigm is to understand this. Everything I'm going to present today is going to be the subtraction between the situation where the stimulus was shown at the visible pathway. So here, that's the condition of the visible world. And then another situation where they presented a mask, and then blank again, and then blank, and then mask. So then blue versus red subtracts the difference in the brain activation in terms of expectation, whatever, in terms of everything here except this one. And that's a way to isolate the response to the visible words. This kind of cognitive subtraction is a quite important kind of concept in consciousness research and also neuroscience in general. All right, so then the visible or blank kind of situation is subtracted, and then what they found is the following. So this is a sagittal view. So you see the brain in slice, but this forward to the backward kind of slice. And then what you see is that the red part is the response that is very, very strongly different from chance. Okay. 10 to the minus 12. So that's really like 0.00001 kind of significance here. And that's area called the Fuchs-form gyrus related to word recognition. And then it's important to also point out that there are several other areas in the frontal areas and the parietal areas that they found significant difference between seeing the word and not seeing the word. Okay, all right. Next, so what happens when they did this cognitive subtraction between visible and masked blank, which is this pathway, versus masked word. So this pathway, mask blank, mask word, mask blank, blank mask. And then if you subtract this, then all of this are kind of common. So this part, not seeing but shown versus not seeing, not shown. And this is the critical subtraction. And then when they did that, they found this result. So here, the pattern of the result kind of looks similar in the sense that they also found that the Fuchs-form gyrus and a little bit of the frontal areas. However, the magnitude of response is much, much smaller. Previously, it was 10 to the minus 12. And now it's 10 to the minus 1, 2, 3. Okay. And so this means that, weakened response is induced by the contrast between the masked word versus masked blank. To put them both in the same figure, so here's the contrast. So it's the same figure, but side by side. If you look at this area, fusiform gyrus, and then plot the magnitude of the response, then the visible word versus visible blank produces really huge response like this. And that's the source of this 10 to the minus 12. On the other hand, this fusiform gyrus for the masked word, it does produce some kind of response like this, and it's different from 0 over 10 seconds, but it's much weaker in terms of the response, significance. And also, multiple areas of the frontal parietal areas are missing here. And even though this part looks similar in terms of color, the blue or green here is like 10 to the minus 2, but here, this one, for example, is already 10 to the minus 5. So not only the fusiform gyrus, everywhere else, it has a much stronger response when you see visible words. That's the conclusion. And when you look at the brain as a whole for the visible contrast versus masked contrast, you see, not only fusiform gyrus, but there are multiple areas, activated, and the masked contrast is much weaker. And then this is the horizontal view, slice like this way, going from bottom to the up, and you see quite a different kind of extent and also magnitude. And the duration of the response is observed. And in terms of the duration, they use the EEG experiment using the exact same paradigm, which is also very nice in this paper. And comparing between visible versus visible blank, visible contrast, you see already a huge difference in occipital areas in RE 156 milliseconds. And the masked one also shows something around 172 milliseconds RE, but again, the magnitude of the response is very different. It's much, much bigger for the visible. And then after 250 milliseconds, then again, it's big response observed in the visible versus almost, noise-like kind of pattern for the masked stimuli. And then finally, much later time, it's again, bigger response over 500 milliseconds in the parietal areas. But here, it's, again, smaller response for the masked contrast. So before concluding, Dehaene asked the following very important question. Do weak responses induced by the masked stimuli leave any behavioral consequences? And according to 4 behavioral experiments, of course, the answer is no, right? Either stimulus detection, or word naming, or recognition memory, or post choice, they found basically there's no, way to find any kind of behavioral consequences according to the, masked stimuli. Okay, but the team didn't actually stop there, and they asked the following important question. Can weak brain activation facilitate word process? And to address that, maybe the 4 tasks they used was not really proper. It was not sensitive enough. So they came up with the following different tasks. The task was this implicit word categorization task, artificial versus natural categorization on the target stimuli. But the target stimuli was always preceded by the masked prime. So to be more specific, what they did was that a very similar kind of a sandwich masking paradigm up until here. Okay, so mask, and then stimulus, which was either capital letter or small letter, and then mask again. And then finally, the stimulus was presented. And then here, 500 milliseconds of a presentation of the target, this is target, is presented until the response. So it was always visible. And then this was always invisible to the subject, okay? And then they had to press a button, whether it was artificial device, like a radio, or a natural device, like, dog or something like that. Artificial, natural, as fast as possible, and with the highest accuracy. And then what they found was that depending on the type of the stimulus, they found a completely different result. The most important difference is this white versus black contrast, okay? So regardless of here, they are not really interested in whether the response was artificial or natural, okay? The important thing is that whether the category or the identity of the prime word, like radio, and the target word was the same or different, okay? And then also same or different kind of case, upper or lower case. So here, this radio case would correspond to the different case and the same word here. So here, roughly speaking, the subject was responding in 608 milliseconds to say that it was artificial, okay? And then if it was actually the same case, radio written in a capital letter, then it was slightly more faster here. That's a black one. But then if radio was preceded by the different word, then this increased the reaction time substantially here in both cases. Okay, so that means that even though you can't really see it, your behavior, changes in roughly like 10 to 15 milliseconds, and that is, very weak in terms of the duration, but still significant kind of effect. And the further one, important thing they checked was in a separate task. Now they get rid of this last target part, and then after showing this only prime, they asked whether the prime word was either one way or the other, like natural or artificial, or was it radio or something else. And even with that, D prime was 0, 50% chance performance. So we can't consciously use the information about this category of the artificial or natural here, but your behavior is facilitated. And that is compatible with the residual very weak activation in the brain due to the masked stimuli. Okay. So in summary, so the Haynes team has established that the strongly masked stimuli are not possible to detect, identify, remember, or discriminate for the behavior paradigms. However, the neural responses for the strongly masked stimuli are observed, and yet it was weaker and short-lived using fMRI and EEG. And without giving up, they further tested a sensitive paradigm, and then demonstrated that this residual brain activity does result in something such as word category priming. However, if you remember, one of the reasons why I introduced this invisible stimulus masked stimulus paradigm is to see whether we can reproduce blind sight-like behavior in us, normal observers. And if you remember, this doesn't seem like the conclusion similar to the blind sight behaviors. So let's step back and examine the blind sight behaviors again in the next video.